have you in yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Minister, and thanks, Deputy. I think the question was about the removal of treatment decisions from enduring powers of attorney in the Amendment Bill. So the Amendment Bill doesn't depart from the policy positions in the 2015 Act. Chiefly, it's by way of procedural improvements, and there's two strands to those improvements in the main, if you like. One is procedural improvements and efficiencies, removing red tape. For example, throughout the Act, we're removing a number of mandatory referrals to the court system where that's just not appropriate or necessary or would incur undue cost or burden. The other strand is improved safeguards, and there's a couple of junctures in the Act where it's necessary to balance the removal of red tape and improved efficiency and safeguards. During the preparation of the Amendment Bill in relation to EPAs, the feedback that we got from clinicians in the HSE was that you have superior provisions in Part 8 of the Act which relate to advanced healthcare directives around the making of advanced directives for healthcare than you do in Part 7 relating to enduring powers of attorney. And in some instances, some of those decisions will quite literally be on-the-spot life or death decisions around a person's care. The advice that we got from clinical experts was that you couldn't have too many cooks in that scenario. You needed one person who had authority, and if you had multiple people with authority, it would just introduce a lack of clarity. That could have adverse consequences for the person at the end of the day. We were also advised that the processes set out in Part 8 are much more extensive around where there's an ambiguity as to what a person's will and preference in relation to treatment might be, and that Part 8 offered better safeguards in those scenarios for a person's safety and for respect for a person's will and preference. So that was the basis of the decision to remove treatment decisions from the EPA process.
So after a diagnosis, would you have to draft two separate instruments?
Yes, but the Decision Support Service does have some operational levers to make that easier. They have fee-waiving powers, for example. So I think there are levers when the Act is in operation that can reduce the burden on having to make two applications. You could make them at the same time, and I think the DSS will be able to assist in that process. But there are superior safeguards in Part 8, and that has been the primary reason why we've done this.
Okay, I suppose just worth pointing out to the Minister that the Irish Dementia Care Working Group have just pointed out issues around that just after receiving a diagnosis, having to go about that, just to highlight it with the Minister, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. So if I could just say in relation to dementia, and it was one of the areas that I prioritised when I came in as Minister. So when I came in as Minister, we had 8 dementia advisors, and we now have 28, and we also have 31 memory clinics throughout the country. And also, as I said earlier, 15% of all dementia home care hours, 15% of all home care hours are dementia specific, and we also have dementia home care packages. So we have made a lot of strides in relation to what we have done for dementia. Previously to 2020, there was no ring fence funding for dementia. We were always dependent on dormant accounts and philanthropy, and I have embedded dementia in the base now of all health budgets going forward, and we have built on it for the last 3 years. There are obviously there are quite a lot of complications in relation to capacity when it comes to dementia. And I do believe going forward that the clarity that in the Assisted Decision Making Act will be very helpful. I'm going to ask Dr. Philip Dodd to come in relation to delayed discharges, just to answer that question for you.
Deputy Kearns, thanks for asking that question about a very vulnerable part of our population. So based on the National Psychiatric Database that the Health Research Board has in place that monitors psychiatric inpatient and admissions and discharges, based on the report in 2021, the numbers of people with intellectual disability admitted to psychiatric hospitals is actually very low. However, the length of time that they spend in hospital is very long, and I think that speaks to some of the care planning issues that you highlighted. Sharing the Vision is aware of this as a challenge, and 2 particular recommendations are seeking to ameliorate this problem. Recommendation 45 is really looking at gathering much more detail on delayed discharges from approved centres, and Recommendation 48 is specifically about looking at a greater level of integrated care planning for these types of individuals. And with that in mind, the HSE has established the National Placement Oversight Group, that is an integrated group coming from mental health and disabilities that seeks to really come up with the most person-centred and timely placement for people who often present with quite complex needs. And the effort there is really to provide the most individualised service as close to the individual's home and community as possible.
Thank you. Just the final question, Chair, was on the national policy on access to services and how kind of well integrated it has been.
Siobhan, can you do that?
Yeah, I might speak to that. So there are a number of access policy issues. There's some for children's services. So I think your example
Children's
spoke.
services.
Oh, it's children's services.
It's probably a separate example, but it's the children's services in terms of integration that I'm wondering about. Yeah.
Okay, so the national access policy for children is around ensuring that children, regardless of need, have a one door to enter in terms of pathways of service. So that means within CHOs, the policy speaks to the expectation that the primary care teams that provide children's services liaise very closely with the Children's Disability Network teams, and that the two teams working together ensure that for families and for the child that the services are provided that focus on the child. So for some children it may be a period of time with the primary care, for instance the speech and language therapist, but maybe if a child has more complex needs, perhaps maybe needing two or more complex interventions, that they then get those services in the Children's Disability Network team. I think what we're seeing in terms of disability services is we have seen the development of the Children's Disability Network teams, and I know this has come up in this committee before, and that we see different levels of completion of those teams across the country. So what the focus for the HSE, and it is very much a HSE policy to ensure that integrated and cohesive delivery. So certainly it is important that we see and we are able to get that update from the HSE around how that integration is working and having metrics that speak to getting that assurance from the HSE that that's happening for families. But certainly you've given an example around Cork, which is possibly more to do with adult services.
No, these are for children. Yes,
okay.
so trying to get from the Beara Peninsula into Bantry for their education purposes for young people. And I had a topical issue on it yesterday, and it was Minister Rabbitte taking it, and the HSE gave a response to say that there was a bus service, and the Minister said herself, all I had to do was Google it to realise that there wasn't, and that the local St Vincent de Paul and Family Resource Centre had basically put up the money to provide a temporary service, but after Christmas there will be no service, and it just feels like there isn't, the model of care is there, but the integration of that is not happening. And we know that with CDNTs in general, they are a failure at present. Not one fully staffed team. We've spoken at length about those issues at this committee, so I won't go into them now, but I'm just do you feel these models are being integrated into the communities?
I think absolutely they need to be, and that's what the policy speaks to. However, we might come back to you separately on the transport piece. So that's around how together, because transport wouldn't necessarily fall to the health service, be it either primary care or the Children's Disability Network team. So it sounds like there's a local issue there that maybe we could take, that we could come back to. And
that would be great, because it's just like you said, when you go, that you have that one point of contact, and then that there's sort of the stuff is there for you afterwards, and that's just, it's just not the case, I suppose, for most people.
Deputy, could I just ask further to that? Is that in relation to education for the young person, or is it in relation to availing of services?
Education.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
That is
and the final
that is
question.
strange. Sorry, that is unusual, because the majority of children are provided with transport. I know certainly in my area, but obviously there seems to be an anomaly there, and
there's an issue there for sure.
Yeah.
If you look into that, great. And the last question was just the name of the ADHD app. If somebody watching wants to
I'll come back to you in a minute.
Yeah.
I'll look it up on my phone. Yeah. Oh no, I've no signal. Sorry.
Erin McGreehan.
Thank you very much, Ciara. And first, thank you to Senator